What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 721. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how are the 64 player tournaments going now that they're over?
Yeah, they were fun. It was hard to schedule them because, as you know, like you're either committed for about 45 minutes if you lose round one, or about 5 hours you make it all the way to the end. So that kind of variance is a little bit tough, but it just doesn't take much to make a good thing even better with a little bit of stakes. Those definitely had the sweat there. Single limbs also, I think, a pretty cool format for an online tournament. Paper, less so. You don't want to drive half an hour somewhere and lose round one and be done. But yeah, for an online tournament where you can either just go do something else or just join another event, pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. Yeah, we're talking about the Vintage Cube ones. They just ended on Magic Online, but you can catch up with Luis's escapades into those 64-player tournaments on his YouTube channel, which, of course, you can find on the front page of our website, lrcast.com. Luis is not the only co-host, though. We've got our additional co-host here today. We've got TBS joining us to talk, well, about two different topics. We'll get to those in just a minute. But first, hello, TBS. How's London treating you?
The weather's gotten a little cold, so London's, very famous cold weather is kicking in. But apart from that, I guess my family was a bit sick over the weekend. But apart from that, I think we're doing okay.
It sounds like things aren't going great. Maybe you should come back to Seattle.
Seattle doesn't have better weather, so I don't know if that really is.
Yeah, well, today that is not true. It's beautiful. It's like 70 out today, but I'm sick too, so maybe you should just hang out in London. Well, thanks for coming on again, TBS. We love having you on. We're going to be talking about Tempest. We were going over the card list leading up to the show, prepping and stuff, and we were all just, this card, remember that card? This is really just a true all-timer for me, and I know some of our audience and you guys as well. So we're going to take a walk down memory lane and go over Tempest. We're also going to talk about some news that we got last week about the changes to booster packs and how it affects you and drafting and all that kind of stuff. So before we do that, though, I want to mention our Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. You get a thank you card and a sticker for signing up. And we want to thank everybody who has done so, who supports us over there on Patreon. It does mean a lot to us. And if you want to check it out, you can find the link in the show notes or over at lrcast.com. The cool part about it, you can sign up for any amount of time. There's no commitment to it. You can leave. People come back all the time. Sometimes your life circumstances change. You can change the amount at any point. It's fully flexible. That's how we like it. And it's on a per episode basis. So in that case, we have to deliver in order for you to support us. And that's how we have it set up for that reason. So again, it's patreon.com/limited resources. Thank you to everybody who supports us. Okay, so let's start with the current news here, gentlemen, because Tempest has been out since 1997. It's not going anywhere. But we did get some somewhat shocking, but maybe not quite as shocking as it seemed on the surface, news about changing the structure of actual booster packs. Again, we've had the same structure for a little while now. But maybe TBS, if you could walk us through some of what's going on here with these, they're called play boosters.
Yeah. So previously, most sets came with three different types of boosters. There were draft boosters, set boosters, and collector boosters. We're not going to talk about collector boosters; they're staying. But the other two, draft boosters and set boosters, they were targeted at different audiences. Draft boosters targeted at limited players specifically. That's why they're called draft boosters. And they kind of they had 15 cards in the pack. Basically normal distribution of cards as we've always learned about them. And set boosters were a 12-card pack and basically had more chances at rares and special cards. And they were targeted at people who are buying the set to crack these packs so they could kind of build a collection. And what they were finding, Wizards was finding, is that there was obviously a large proportion of people buying the set boosters, actually almost 4 or 5 to 1 when it comes to boxes. And so Wizards, to basically kind of avoid having to discontinue the draft boosters, basically decided, okay, but we want to still have limited. let's actually see if we can do a 2-in-1. And so they've developed a play booster, which is going to be a 14-card booster that is playable and limited, so it's good for draft and sealed. But it has some of the characteristics that were previously in the set booster. So, and on top of that, I mean, this is something that people talked about. The cost of the set of this new play booster is a little more than what the draft booster was before.
Okay.
But they've compensated in some ways, not in other ways, and we'll talk about that.
Okay, so yeah, when I looked it up, what I found was that the distribution of the cards in the pack are 6 commons. The 7th card is either another common or it's what they call a card from the list, which we'll talk about in a second. Then there are 3 uncommons, which is what we're used to, 1 rare or mythic rare, depending on that slot. So same that we're used to, a basic land, which we're used to. But then there's a non-foil wild card, as well as a guaranteed foil in every pack wild card. So if we talk about the list, first off, what is the list? What can I get out of a list slot?
So originally in set boosters, the list was a set of about 300 cards. They were all like reprints from sets past.
Okay.
But they are changing what the list means in these boosters. They're going to be a much more curated set of about 40 cards that are actually going to be somewhat tied, at least thematically, and also making sure that they work in limited relatively well with the set that they're in.
Okay.
So it's closer to the bonus sheet that we've seen in other sets like Enchanted Tales or the Heroes Returned that was in March of the Machines.
Okay, so a sort of a guaranteed bonus sheet, but maybe not quite as thematic, but still focused on the limited set. And then when it says non-foil wild card and foil wild card, what are they referring to with wild cards?
They're basically any card that you could get in any of the other slots. And so it's just kind of basically to, for want of a better word, give you a chance at a higher variance card. So like you could get another common, you can get another uncommon, you could get another mythic rare. And that's true for 2 slots, one of them non-foil and one of them foil.
Okay. So one of the big discussion topics that came out of this, that one of the knee-jerk reactions from some in the limited community was that technically that means you could get a rare at you will get a rare at the rare/mythic rare slot, but you could actually get one at either wild card plus the list.
Yes, you can actually technically get up to 4 rares per.
Right. So one for each wild card. That's 2, 1 list, and then 1.
Right.
Mythic.
But so the chance of that is like very, very low. In fact, the average amount of rares that you can get in a pack is about like 1.4-ish. We don't know exactly.
Okay.
Our friend Sikovitz kind of like broke down some of these numbers, and the chance of actually getting, like a lot of people talking about the chance of getting 24 rares in a sealed deck. Basically, the chance of getting 24 rares in a sealed deck basically borders on winning the lotto twice.
Okay, yeah. So that's not a thing. But
I mean, not really. But like,
how many could we expect? How many rares do you know off the top of your head, TBS? How many we could expect from a traditional draft booster?
From a traditional booster, if it doesn't have any booster fun, any like Enchanted Tales or anything else like that, I think it's like just over 1. It's like 1 point.
So the guaranteed something. 1 plus the chance of a foil rare.
Right.
Okay. So tiny.
That's right. And then that increases
a lot less than the narrative was when people first looked at this. But we'll get to that.
Yeah, but how about for a more modernized set like Wilds of Eldraine or something like that? Do you have an idea for what the rarity count was?
Yeah. So that's closer to like 1.2 ish.
Okay. So this is up from that, but it's not so dramatic.
Right. Now it's like closer to 1.4. So it's still a jump. I mean, again, sealed deck is going to be the place you'll feel it the most. Sealed deck, the average is something like 9 rares or mythics basically per sealed deck, which is obviously higher than the let's call it 6.5, or maybe even 7-ish beforehand.
This reminds me, though, Luis, of March of the Machine, right? Where we had the battle slot and then the extra. So it felt like you could get a bunch of extra rares there as well. And I'll say, going into the draft format, I didn't really even think about that. Like that wasn't really on my radar about like, oh, there's going to be all these rares. It's going to be changing everything. There were a bunch. I remember opening a bunch of the sealed pools for that and Arena being like, and you've got some more rares here to check out later, because it could only show me 6 on that front screen or whatever. But ultimately, I don't know. I didn't really feel much, it certainly wasn't a negative experience. In fact, I absolutely love that set. What was your takeaway from, like, is this somewhere in the ballpark that you think that March of the Machine would compare to these new boosters?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've already gotten a chance to kind of see how this plays out. Not entirely. So there's a couple of things going on here. Without getting into like their need to do this, we'll talk about that. But like, just from like, how does this affect me as a player who plays limited? I think that we won't exactly know. The caveat to all this is until we actually play, until we start getting into it, until we actually draft under these new conditions. And if that happens, and when that happens, I think we can all make a better judgment. And I reserve the right to change my opinion, right? Like, I don't know what it feels like. My guess is it's not going to feel that different. Like, You're going to open packs. Sometimes the packs will have multiple rares, and that'll be fine. Like, when we drafted March of the Machines and you had the battle slot, you had you could open Invasion of Innistrad, Ragavan, and like a Chrome Host Seed Shark all in the same pack in March of the Machines. Did that happen a lot? No, we all drafted a lot of that set. That set didn't feel like opening a pack was just opening a, Jack in the Box full of rares that just all popped out and sprayed everywhere. Like that's not what that felt like. And this is going to be more like that than it is going to be, what I think a lot of people kind of assume it's going to be like, or at least a lot of the initial reactions of like, this is going to ruin limited. It's not going to ruin limited. And I don't think it's going to be all that different.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to get out of the way right up front here, TBS, is you mentioned the booster pack prices going up. That's not true for Arena though, right?
Yeah, that's right. Arena, I think Aaron in a Q&A yesterday or today basically announced that the Arena prices are going to be the same. Now, we know a lot of our listeners and a lot of people in general are playing Arena. In fact, I think Arena now is the dominant place where people play limited. So for those people, this is not going to change the cost of drafting. It will change the cost of drafting, like in a store. So that's going to probably, I'm just spitballing, but a lot of people said it's about $15. It's going to go to $18. I actually think it will vary. It depends how you get the packs. If you buy a box, generally your cost per pack is a bit lower, so that will probably factor into it. But if you buy retail, it's probably going to be like 15 and it's going to go to 18. So it is unfortunate for those people who that price point is going to basically lessen the amount of times they get to draft.
Totally.
That being said, the increase in the expected value of the rares does mean that you get technically more value out of these packs. Now, I don't want to kind of make necessarily the case that, obviously printing a rare costs the same as printing a common for Wizards of the Coast. So, it definitely takes into account the secondary market and everything else like that. But if you're one of those drafters who, drafts all the rares and at the end they sells it back to the store, like you're going to get a little bit more back when you do that. Again, secondary market is obviously volatile. It's going to be highly varied. And how that actually works out, who's going to know?
Okay,
I will say,
but it's theoretically partially offset by that increase. Okay.
Yeah, it's partially. And I just want to kind of quickly give a shout out. One reason why this is a good change for one group that it's a good change for are stores. Stores used to have to buy like so many different types of products, and they had to kind of like order beforehand exactly the right amount. There was a chance to reorder, but it takes a long time, and obviously you lose sales in the meantime. So
yeah, I just want to say, yes, it is a good change for stores, but it's not like we were forced to have all these lines of products. That was Wizards trying to make a bunch of lines of products. It's like they're like, hooray, we've saved you from the problem we created for you. So yes, it's a good change for stores. I like that they're going that direction, and I like that they are, that's something that they're thinking about. But let's just to be clear here, they did cause this problem too.
I know, that's fair enough. I mean, look, I'm one, like, let's go back to starters and boosters. That's all I care about. But but no, you're totally right. Like, this is not necessarily something that they haven't created, but it is a move in the right direction, I think, for stores. I think they've also said that they're going to try and like reduce the amount of like other supplementary products per set. I don't know exactly that. I've heard that's also happening. So hopefully that means that the stores are going to get a little bit more of a break. I know the stores are doing it quite tough, and this hopefully will be a good change for them.
Now, this does bring up an interesting thing, though, with the actual design of the set itself, right? Because now, the numbers are skewed in a different way with the number of commons that you see. And also, apparently, they're going to be doing like more uncommons, like not more in the booster pack. There's still the same slots, but there will be more of them to choose from to be put into those slots, if that makes sense. And then maybe some design choices around those with regards to evening out the job that the commons do and making the uncommons a little more build-around-y or a little more niche.
Yeah, so Rosewater and Foresight did a Q&A, and one of the things that Forsyth, I think, was one who said that like there were going to be more because there's more uncommons and because of the role uncommons are going to play, there's going to be more synergy cards and more build around cards, because that's what uncommons will have more of a focus on, and there's going to be more uncommons, and that sounds great because that's a lot of what I think makes draft really fun for invested players, not even just like for me or for you. I think a lot of people keep coming back to draft because of the kind of decks you can draft that are specific, and these cards really will help with that. I'm a little worried about the lack of complexity. In that same Q&A, Aaron said like, oh, players want their cards to do more things. We don't need as many simple cards, and it's like, well, first of all, you don't have any simple cards. And second of all, I guess I'm a little suspicious. They have more information than I do. I'm not going to say that I'm right and they're wrong, but it feels like Magic has been moving towards more and more and more complexity. And I would struggle to say that that's like a big selling point, but that is what's going to happen. There are going to be less cards with less text and more cards with more text. And that's kind of the road we're traveling down, which who knows, maybe it'll be good. Like my honest opinion overall, like, do I think this change is good for limited? I think I'm not firmly confident it's good or bad for limited. I'm ready to wait and see on it, but I don't feel like deeply negative about it. Like if I had to guess, this will make limited a little bit more fun, actually. Like if I was forced to pick a side.
TBS, what's your answer to that question? Is this change good for limited?
I think the player limited will be pretty neutral, pretty similar. Maybe I actually don't mind the slightly higher variance in the packs. That part's actually probably slightly positive. I don't draft that much in person, but I love the ability to do so. And so if that means that less in-person drafts are firing, that is a pity. I will say the majority of the limited I do play is online. So in that case, it doesn't change too much. So overall, I think this is neutral for me, with maybe a slight positive in some cases.
Yes, I will say my commentary was just on gameplay. I think that I can't say that a price increase sounds like a positive for the player base, but you know me, I'd actually rarely go from Wizards' perspective on this, but I will say the price of everything is going up, and booster packs I actually feel like haven't like dramatically increased in price over their lifetime compared to a lot of the cost of a lot of other things that we purchase. So I mean, I'm not going to defend the whole system. That's not what I'm here to do. But I am going to say that like this price increase doesn't sound like completely unwarranted. Like, so I'm not saying it's good, but I also I don't think that it's Wizards trying to get us for every last dollar. Like, I mean, they do that in plenty of ways, but this is just one of those things that, yeah, the price has to go up on some things. Like, I agree, it doesn't cost them more money to print 14 cards instead of 15 or to print more rares, but it's their product. They can raise prices on it, and I think they've been at least somewhat restrained on doing so when it comes to the price of boosters. Maybe I'm way off. Maybe other people have different opinions on that, but I've seen the historical price of boosters from when I started to now. It's like it's gone up way less than a lot of other similar things.
That's true. Yeah, especially going all the way back to the 90s, which is where we're going to go right now, because we get to go back to Tempest. Oh my God, I'm so excited for this. Tempest was the 12th expansion for Magic the Gathering. It came out in 1997, 350 cards. And check out this breakdown, fellas. 110 commons, 110 uncommons, 110 rares, and 20 basics. Why mess with it?
Yeah, it's like, this is some simplicity. I mean,
That's right.
It's exactly what you get. What you see is what you get.
Yeah, that's the broad strokes. We're going to start things off with a crack-a-pack, and then we'll get into the more details and stuff about what Tempest was all about. So our first card off of our Tempest crack-a-pack, and what's really sad? I know I have a Tempest pack somewhere in my storage unit in some box or something. I just can't get it before the show goes, but I mean a real one. We're doing a virtual one. So here's the first card. It's called Frog Tongue. This is when they hadn't used up all the good card names, I guess.
Yeah. It gives a creature flying, and it's an aura that gives a creature fly, or can block flyers for 1 green mana, gives a creature reach, and you can pay a green to return it to your hand.
It says, when Frog Tongue comes into play, draw a card. Enchanted creature can block creatures with flying. It's so much worse.
Oh, there's a different one. Yeah. Sorry. My version was a lot worse, actually.
Fill folio work. Yeah, this is a cantrip that gives a creature reach.
Yeah,
it's not. If they printed it now, you'd play it in some decks.
You could bargain it.
Yeah, it's not the worst.
Next is Shatter, which there are numerous reprints in Tempest, especially these bread and butter removal and basic effects that they kind of like to have at that point. TBS for each of the colors. You'll see cards like Shatter and Dark Ritual in this set.
Yeah, there's Disenchant, Counterspell, a lot of the stuff that they considered just basic effects.
Right. And by the way, Shatter's 1 in a red instant destroy target artifact. They haven't printed it in a long time, so there's probably a good number of people who haven't seen it. But that's the OG destroy an artifact for red. This next one is a Sliver. And Slivers is a major theme in this set. In fact, it's one of 2 mechanics or themes that they pushed really hard. And this is the one you want. This is Muscle Sliver. It's 1 and a green for a 1/1, except for it says all slivers get +1/+1. And TBS, that's read quite literally.
Yes, it counts itself. It's a grizzly bear. Obviously, the goal whenever you're drafting slivers in the sets is just get as many muscle slivers as possible because they like to hunt in packs. Yeah. I mean, this is the first time slivers have appeared in Magic at this time. So
you just got to watch out you don't damage them during the draft and you have to get a replacement.
Also important templating for this actually affects your opponent's slivers.
Yeah, too. That's where I was going.
That was a big one. I was referring to, by the way, a famous story about cheating where someone added a muscle sliver and it wasn't stamped to the draft. And the claim was, it got damaged, so I threw the other one away and replaced it. A judge told me I could, and they couldn't find the judge who did this. And it's like, okay, well, do you want to go through the garbage to find the old one? And the player, who was it? It was Mark Justice, right?
It was Mark Justice.
Yeah. Mark Justice was like, no, I don't think I'm going to go through the trash. And it's like,
I'll walk by the trash on my way to the car because I just got booted from this tournament. Oh, that's incredible.
I think he dropped when he was getting the heat on that. I'm not exactly sure.
that must have been when you could still get away with that. Next is Spell Blast. This is the blue X Interrupt. Back before they retemplated all interrupts to instants. Counter target spell with total casting costs equal to X.
This is actually a reprint from Alpha.
Mm-hmm. So that's, and Shatter is as well, right? So we've 2 of our 4 cards. Next is Reality Anchor. This is 1 and a green for, an instant. Target creature loses shadow until end of turn.
Well,
draw a card.
This is not the easiest way to introduce shadow into a discussion.
No. Let's hang on and we'll see if we get another card. And if not, we'll talk about it for real. Shadow, slivers, and buyback were kind of the 3 things in the set. So this is one of them. We'll talk about shadow in a minute. Cloud Chaser Eagle is 3 and a white for a 2/2 flying bird. And when it comes into play, you blow up an enchantment.
This card's solid. It's a 2/2 fly for 4. It was at the time. It was right.
It's funny going back and looking at the templating on stuff too. Well, the slivers was actually a whole different discussion. We'll get to that. But the Cloud Chaser Eagle would blow up your own enchantments if they didn't have one. There's no optionality, and they figured out not to do these things, and it is just funny looking back and seeing oh right, of course, this is just technology we hadn't learned yet.
Yeah, especially because white was the enchantment color. You had pacifisms, so often you couldn't play a Cloud Chaser. You'd unlock your pacifism. So,
and it's in this set, pacifism, right?
Yep, yeah. That's right.
Also interesting little sub note, but it literally says when Cloud Chaser Eagle comes into play. And of course, the term that we use and have used for a long time now is enters the battlefield. When they made some changes to what they felt were rules text that was a little bland and made it have a little more spice, this one never stuck for me. I mean, of course, I say enters the battlefield and all that, but I actually like comes into play better. I always felt like enters the battlefield was a little bit forced. Some of the other ones I thought were really successful. I thought Exile was much, much better than Remove from the Game entirely or Remove from the Game. Yes. Shorter and more evocative, but enters the battlefield.
Remove from the Game ends up being a lie because now the Exile zone is just another game zone. Which
it is.
That's another one of my rants. So I'll get it. Totally. I'll treat you to that one someday.
But I got to say, it's actually refreshing just reading comes into play because it just fits better for me. I've never really viewed the Magic area as a battlefield. I think of that more as like a war, like a human war type thing rather than this, but so it goes. Next is Hero's Resolve. This is 1 and a white for an aura enchant creature. It just used to be called enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+5. Can I interest you in some toughness?
Yeah, this was the original card that was called Pants. Yes.
Oh, this was Pants?
This was Pants.
Oh,
one of the
my
things
God.
You'll see.
Is that Gerard wearing some nice pants?
I kind of feel like Tempest is actually a pretty big turning point, or like a kind of inflection point when it comes to our old sets, which is something I want to talk about. Which is we're right now crossing the border of ancient into we're still talking 20 years ago. We're not talking modern, but we're now crossing the border where some of the references and things Marshall's going to get. We're getting to the point where it's sets I actively drafted as a player, whereas some of these older sets, we started with sets that weren't really even drafted. Tempest is we're getting there. I feel like we're picking up some momentum here.
By the way, TBS, Did you hear how cute it was? Luis said it's 20 years old. It's 26 years old. You're really old now, Luis. So this is, it's bad. I know. It came out in 97, but that's also the year after I graduated from high school, Luis. So don't feel too bad. Next is Rats of Wrath. This is 1 and a black for a 2/1. And you can pay black to destroy target artifact, creature, or land you control.
Not used very often.
Yeah.
That ability.
No, it was frequently used as a 2-mana 2/1 in draft. And so there was a sub-theme, though, here in this set of wanting to have abilities to destroy your own cards, because buyback was a mechanic where it tacked on a cost onto a spell, and when the spell resolved, you got it back in your hand. Capsize, right? Bounce target permanent. Rats of Wrath actually counters capsize because they capsize your card. In response, you use Rats of Wrath to destroy it. Their spell doesn't resolve. They don't get it back. Okay. I remember that actually being a pretty big deal when playing these sets.
That's 6 sideboard tech. I like that. Next is Ledger Main. I don't remember this one.
Ledger Domain.
Ledger Domain.
Ledger Domain. What is that? Is that an English word?
Yeah, it's basically sleight of hand. It's an old word.
Okay.
It means that.
2 blue sorcery permanent, which I'm sure caused a lot of fights among people who said, nope, it's mine forever. Permanently exchange control of target artifact or creature you control for target permanent of the same type.
So it's basically a kind of a classic exchange ability. I mean, it's fine. I mean, you definitely play these abilities sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it was better in older sets like this where the card quality varied more.
Way better. Yeah, I mean, these are sets where, like, if you could give them a 1/1 and take their 3/3 flyer, you would frequently just win the game based on that. Or like, there's matchups where like one person has like a 5/5 that it's like, whoa, how am I going to deal with that? I mean, we're still kind of in the era, though the creatures are getting better, of spells trump creatures. I mean, Tempest, we'll see that, but Ledger Domain was a card I remember being decent. Like, there was matchups where it was bad, there's decks where it wasn't very good, or decks where it wasn't good against, but it had some applications. Yeah, nothing yet that I'm too excited about.
I was going to ask, is Muscle Sliver still our pretty clear?
I think so.
I would really not want to take a Muscle Sliver first pick. I hated drafting green in that format.
I agree. I mean, also remember, drafting slivers might help your opponent too if they're drafting slivers too.
Okay, quick aside design question. TBS, slivers your side only or all slivers?
Like, what should you do? Or what?
Yeah, what should you do as a game designer?
Because we have some of both.
Yeah, I think you're right, side only. I mean, I really didn't like having to change it. I think it was bad. Like, once they decided, I would have just kept it.
Right.
But if we started from the beginning, I would just say your side.
Yeah,
what do you think, Louis?
Agree with both of those things.
Yeah, he's of course right. Even though it's way cooler that slivers do all of them, it's more flavor filled. Imp's Taunt is next. It's 1 and a black for an instant. Target creature attacks this turn if able. And here's our first instance of buyback. So you can pay 3 mana in this case to buy back 3, tacked onto the price of Imp's Taunt. And if you do, instead of going to the graveyard, it goes to your hand. Very powerful.
I mean, this card, I remember, wasn't particularly good.
Well, this card sucks, but buyback's very powerful. Yeah,
buyback is powerful. This card is just a little too expensive, a little too situational. I mean, it got played somewhat. I definitely remember some people playing it, but I don't think it was very good.
What Gallantry is next? It's 1 and a white for an instant. Target blocking creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. Draw a card. Man, if you can pull it off, you're probably getting yourself a nice little 2 for 1. But if it goes the opposite direction pretty quickly, if they have removal or bounce or something.
I think this card's like solid. There was a lot less blocking in Tempest than you might think because of Shadow, but it still was a card that you could put in your deck if you were a more defensive deck, which generally wasn't the best place to be.
Yeah. I remember never thinking this card was good enough, but like, it obviously at rate is okay.
All right, next card is an icon. It's the fixed version. One of the many fixed versions of Black Lotus. It's just one little petal. It's Lotus Petal. 0 mana, tap it, sack it, add 1 mana of any color.
Okay, here's a hint if you ever played Tempest Draft. Don't play Lotus Petal. It's really bad.
However, here's a hint to all of you playing Tempest Draft 26 apparently years ago. Don't throw away all those Lotus Petals. They're going to be worth a bunch of money.
Yes.
I guess you can draft them if you just like going to put them into your pocket.
Yeah, there was somebody at the, I can't remember who was I talking to you, Louis? Somebody whose favorite card was Lotus Petal, and they just had binders and binders of them. Oh Lord. Next is
it's like buying Bitcoin.
Yeah, but these are still worth something. Next card is Armored Pegasus. Really exciting card, guys. It's 1 and a white for a 1/2 with flying.
It's playable.
Yeah, I mean, you know what's good to do with Armored Pegasus? Put pants on them. It was really good with pants.
Pants up the Pegasus. Get yourself a 2/7 flyer.
What killed it? Nothing.
Probably nothing. Where would you be? Honestly, what card are you taking out of the pack at this point? Cloud Chaser, Eagle, Armored Pegasus, Ledger Domain.
So, I know what I would have taken at the time because I had figured out the format. But Pants is probably the best card to take right now.
Which is funny. Almost no one would have. Yeah. Not only would almost none of us have done that, most people listening would have been like, what the hell are you talking about?
I just thought that exact sentence in my head. Is he right, Luis?
TBS actually, this is one of the few draft formats in history TBS knows a lot more than I do about. We're still in the era where TBS was a pro and I wasn't, by the way. Like I do want to make that clear.
That's true.
I would call myself like not pro right now at this point, but I did play.
You played in PTQs. You talked to people who were on the pro tour. Like I was far away from that. I was playing drafts at the local store here and there and playing my 80 card decks and stuff. Like I was not doing that. I would have probably back then taken Muscle Sliver. Right now, I don't know. I'd probably still take Muscle Sliver, even though I'd be pretty unhappy about it. Maybe Legerdemain.
Legerdemain, yeah.
I kind of like Legerdemain. It's a spicer.
So I think Legerdemain's okay. I the way that the limited format played out is that white and black were very good because of Shadow, and we'll talk about Shadow later. And what Heroes Resolve, which is known as Pants, did was like it kind of broke that stalemate some ways, because nearly all the Shadow cards had low toughness, and so you just put Pants on a Shadow creature, and it could attack very easily, and it could block very easily, and so you just win that kind of Shadow war. On top of it all, it also protected against a lot of the removal. A lot of all the red removal and some of the other removal was actually really bad against Pants specifically.
Okay.
It's very. I mean, I could say with actually pretty strong like conviction that would be the right pick, but even back then I wouldn't have made that pick. This was kind of like in hindsight I would have known that pick now.
Okay.
So
well, we do have
this
two
is
more
actually the
cards.
first Grand Prix I played. Actually, the first Grand Prix I played was Tempest sealed. Tempest
sealed. Oh man, that's cool. Did you do set boosters or play boosters, collector boosters? Like
no.
What'd you get for your bonus slot?
No, you get we got a starter deck and 2 boosters.
Oh,
this is old school.
That's incredible. 2 more cards. Canyon Wildcat, 1 in a red for a 2/1 Mountain Walker.
Oh, that's the pick. This card I think was better than the other one. Just it's a 2-mana 2/1, which was already good in this format, and some percentage of the time it was just unblockable. If they had a mountain, they couldn't block it. Like
imagine it with
there's matchups,
yeah,
right?
Sure.
I mean, if you played against like red green and you played Canyon Wildcat, put Pants on it on turn 3, they were dead. Like there's no outs. They might as well go to the next game.
I saw that happen many times. So
are rare.
The TBS when a cat wears Pants, does it wear it around like on its waist, around the back 2 legs, or around its torso?
Do you need
the pants
2
are on
pairs
all 4
of Heroes
legs?
Resolve to get the full effect? Like,
do Pants have a tail hole? No,
right.
So obviously it has to be the other way.
Oh, okay.
He's thought about this. Our rare is Corpse Dance, which is a card that's still around, still relevant on some level. It's definitely in the Vintage Cube. It is 2 and a black for an instant. And it has one thing that I absolutely hate, and I wish they never did, but it's put the top creature card of your graveyard into play. That creature, as it reads here, is unaffected by summoning sickness this turn. Remove the creature from the game at end of turn. So interesting to read that, just because we have retemplated our language, even though it's the same effect. It gets haste and you exile it. But this card also has buyback of 2. So for 3 mana, you can get a creature back for a turn. But for 5 mana, I mean, you can go through your whole graveyard. The one thing I don't like about it, though, is that it does care about the order that your cards are in the graveyard, which, after a certain point, they got rid of that because they realized it was kind of obnoxious. But, if you're playing with cards like this around, you can't reorder your graveyard. When you pick it up, you have to keep it in the same order. When you put multiple creatures into the graveyard at the same time, you have to think about which one you want to have on top. It can get kind of annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah. The graveyard order mattering, started in Alpha with Nether Shadow. There's like Ashen Ghoul, there's Corpse Dance, Shallow Grave. Like it appeared to be a rich vein of design space. In reality, it was horrible, and they stopped doing it. And they even changed the rules so that formats where those cards aren't present, you're allowed to rearrange your graveyard, which technically means when you're playing Legacy, you're actually not supposed to fiddle with your graveyard.
Oh, interesting.
I don't actually know what the official adjudication on that is. Clearly, the people who have Nether Shadow in their deck, which some decks have played, don't do it. But like, if I'm playing Blue Red Delver and I'm just messing with my graveyard, is that against the rules? I guess I don't even know.
Probably.
Well, yeah. There's a card called Phyrexian Furnace in a fusion set that actually is like
exiles the bottom card, right? Yeah. So, but anyway, setting all that junk aside, Corpse Dance is awesome because you can kind of use it the way you suggested, Marshall, where you're just like, you go through your graveyard one by one, each of your creatures hit them. The reality though is if the creature dies or is sacrificed, it just goes back to your graveyard. Corpse Dance isn't one of those like, if the creature would die, exile it. So there's some creatures that sacrifice themselves. That Rats of Wrath could actually let you keep getting the same creature back. Bottle Gnomes was the classic. It's a 1/3 that you can sack to gain 3 life. Or if they just like attack you with a 4/4 and you Corpse Dance back a 4/4 and block, your creature's still there to bring back. I mean, the card's super powerful, has a bunch of synergies. Some decks will just have a hard time beating it, even if you weren't going out of your way to synergize with it. I would be slamming Corpse Dance here.
What do you think, TBS?
I think I'd go Canyon Wildcat here. I mean, Corpse Dance is good. I generally felt the formats are fast enough. We're getting up to 5 mana to kind of abuse this. It was actually really tough. Like Shadow really just makes the format quite fast.
All right. I do believe that you would do that if you were playing in a Tempest PTQ top 8. I disbelieve that if you were playing a Tempest draft today, you would do that.
That's fair enough.
Let's get into the main stuff here for Tempest. I mentioned that it came out in 97. One of the big headliners, though, looking back, TBS, is that we talked about Mirage and stuff like that in the block, but this was the first time that they really planned out a 3-set block.
Yeah, I mean, so Mirage Visions obviously were planned together, or they were designed very, very similarly. But Weatherlight was like kind of mechanically quite off compared to the other two. This is the first time Tempest, Stronghold, and Exodus where they've taken a design through line and taken it all the way through. What this means is that Limited also and Booster Draft was actually going to be growing in that way too. So you play Tempest, Tempest, and then you'd have Tempest, Stronghold, and then Tempest, Stronghold, Exodus when you'd finished. And what this allowed them to do was to do kind of like simple versions of mechanics early and then build on them slowly as the block went along. Honestly, I kind of miss a little bit of that kind of slow burn when it comes to mechanics because, most of the Shadow guys do very similar things in this set. And in the last set, they actually do very, very kind of weird and complex things. They go in and out of Shadow much, much more than they do in this set. That being said, I really just love kind of the building blocks that Tempest sets up for the rest of the block.
What do you think, Luis? This overarching thematic thing ended up being the thing that they stuck with for quite a long time. It's not now, right? Now it feels like, the sets are more one-off and we kind of revisit things to further a storyline rather than trying to do... because what they were going for was like a sort of traditional story arc, right? Three-act play, beginning, middle, end, that type of thing. They kept that for a long time. And this was the first set that kind of set that stage. Not literally, like you mentioned, TBS mentioned, that Mirage Block had that kind of going, but this is the one where they really kind of got the format down.
Yeah, I think that it worked really well. I do think that eventually it was better to go back to just single sets as opposed to the 3-set block paradigm. But that's not because the 3-set block paradigm, wasn't good at all or didn't work. I think it actually did do some pretty good work. And there was, it resulted in some cool stuff. It was cool seeing cards context change from set to set. There was times when you'd open a card and when it was 3 of the same set and it was like a blank or very weak. And then all of a sudden it got really good because of cards in the second or third set. Mm-hmm. And then, it was cool seeing the storyline unfold. I actually remember, I think it was the Duelist printed a picture of all the story moments in Tempest because so many of the cards are story moments, Diabolic Edict when Vadi gets thrown off the ship by Greven and stuff like that, where you end up, it did feel like a cohesive story. I feel like the first time they really leaned into that. And it was really cool seeing the, like TBS said, the mechanics kind of unfold. And maybe that worked better back then than it eventually did. I think, and I think there's room to maybe do some, I could see doing both, have sets. We kind of saw that a little bit with Innistrad. They like doing some like a mix of these things, right? Where like, oh, this set plays off into this set. Like, you had Midnight Hunt into Crimson Vow, and that kind of felt like the old block, right? A chip off the old block structure, as it were. And I think that stuff is pretty cool. Overall, Tempest felt more cohesive than any previous set, and that was neat. I liked seeing that. And I remember really liking that as a kid, and I remember it being cool that the draft format changed, though back then I think my level of sophistication when it came to draft wasn't high enough to fully appreciate that. It would, in time, I would kind of get there.
Yeah.
Also important to note that block constructed was definitely in their minds when they build these things. And so having a constructed format kind of be coherent over 3 sets is actually something that was important. They had Pro Tours using block constructed. So it was actually very, very on top of their mind when they were trying to make these sets mechanically cohesive.
Okay. We talked about the big picture mechanics. Slivers, we talked about, this was a new creature type that Magic invented, right? They look kind of like these, I don't know, alien looking lizardy guys or whatever. They were meant to be sort of formless in the sense that they could take on things around them and then they fed off of each other. They started to get into these ideas where if you had a sliver, all the other slivers would mirror the thing that thing did, and you could sort of build this army up. What a great idea, right? Just the full on, let's lean into a creature type that we made up. So that's pretty cool. It's original to Magic, IP thing.
They did look a lot like xenomorphs from Alien.
They did. Yeah.
But they were original. I would clearly consider this original IP, even if it was a little derivative in terms of let's clearly borrow from the alien mythos or whatever.
Yeah. But really cool and very flavorful. Also, to me, slivers are one of the best mechanics they've ever made because it hits on 2 things at the same time that can be kind of difficult to hit on. One of them is it makes your imagination go, right? You see a sliver or you see your second sliver ever and you're like, oh, I get it. And even if you're young, even if you haven't played the game long, you get the idea that I want to build a deck with all slivers in it. It just plants that seed and you're like, I'm going to do this thing. You feel clever for it, even though it's not clever. It's exactly what they wanted you to think. But it combines that with something that is absolutely core to Magic, which are creatures, right? It's just casting creatures and getting creatures on the board is so much fundamental, and what most newer, younger people that don't play as much, they haven't gone down the road of well, my favorite mechanic is flashback, so I want something that pays me back, and I want to loop this and madness that, and they're not there yet, right? And you need to give people who are just coming into the game in 1997, especially, this idea. And this just shows you the perfect cross-section of making somebody excited about an idea that they have, but also playing directly into Magic's biggest strengths.
Slivers are a home run. Slivers are awesome. There's a reason that they, came back numerous times. And I can tell you, even if I think you should have started by looking at your side only, there was a flavor justification for the slivers to be one unified hive. And drafting slivers was fun. Playing with slivers in casual was fun. They were awesome. They were, I would say, a little bit better than Lycids.
Yeah, that was one of the cycles. We'll talk about that in a minute. TBS, we talked about buyback because we opened a buyback card, but what did buyback mean for competitive play? Because buyback's a lot less flavorful, right? It feels more mechanical. It's more just tack on an extra cost and I get the thing back. And, that hits a different type of player in a different part of the brain.
Yeah. So I'll take it from a couple of perspectives. Firstly, from, let's say, the competitive, spiky kind of player, this buyback's cool. Buyback gives you flexibility to kind of basically take advantage of a single effect, and as long as you have enough mana or whatever the buyback cost is, you're able to kind of just repeat at it. And so in that way, it allowed flexibility, and the repeatability was actually a positive for those kind of spiky players because they wanted that effect over and over again. From a game designer and honestly just a general experience kind of perspective, buyback's not the best thing because like when a game
it's horrendous.
like when the game is about one thing over and over and over again, it doesn't change. This is not a fun experience for the person on the other end. I mean, I can make anything fun if I'm winning the game.
Right.
But like the experience of losing the game by having all your lands bounce to your hand, or the same land bounce to your hand every turn, or the same permanent, or whatever combination of like other buyback things that's going on, you feel very helpless, and not only helpless, it's boring. So in that way, I think buyback is a miss from the design perspective of like, let's make interesting games. And I think there's a reason why they haven't gone back to buyback, because generally having recursion that's that easy is not something that they want to kind of go to the well with. They have had other types of recursion. Buyback comes back in small forms in sets like Modern Horizons, et cetera, but in general, I think it's a place that is not ripe with more design space. I think they're correct for just not hitting it anymore.
Yeah, and two of the cards that I want to bring back to illustrate the point that TBS just made, and I think it's really interesting because I think it has everything to do with timing, which is I'm really glad that these cards existed. They were some of my very first baby steps towards discovering my inner Spike, right? Towards recognizing that there were a whole lot of things that you could do in Magic, and I liked that, which are Capsize, which is the one that TBS was referring to there. It's 1 blue instant, return target permanent to its owner's hand, and it has buyback 3 for 6 total mana, you can return a permanent to its owner's hand and get this card back into your hand. And then the other one is Whispers of the Muse, which is blue instant draw a card, but it has buyback for 5. For 6 mana, 6 freaking mana, you can draw a card, and you can repeat that process as long as you don't get countered, etc.
Both of these cards were high tier constructed playables.
Exactly. And that's the thing that stood out to me was people were playing a bunch of different strategies back then. And, people were building slivers decks and stuff like that. But you started to see these more focused strategies coming to the top, and Capsize, Whispers of the Muse, or, versions of decks like Draw Go or, from Cuneo and stuff that were, hyper focused, because back then the sets weren't as balanced. And so, sometimes there would be a format that had way too much of one very good thing. And in this case, counter spells, card draw, and then the only thing I need to win the game or whatever is go off with Capsize and have something, right? Just anything with, stocking stones, just something with some power or whatever that I could use to kill my opponent 1 damage at a time once I had fully locked them out of the game. Those things suck. Like, those are not cards that they should be printing. They're horrible for gameplay. They're not fun. But dang, I am so glad that they did, because even though I wouldn't advocate printing cards like that now, I'm really glad that they did back then, because the world was much broader in terms of what people were willing to play back then. And so for somebody like me, seeing somebody win with Capsize or Whispers of the Muse was an eye-opening experience where I was like, oh, that's cool. That person figured out the bare minimum that they needed to win and then built everything to support that. And that was an idea that just wasn't quite as popular at this time, at least in the more casual scene that I was in. And it opened my eyes to that. Again, I think that if they printed stuff like this today, especially going back to what you said, TBS, it's just too simple. Right. It's that there's just, they don't make you work for it. It's just a simple matter of getting up to enough mana, and then you can create a horribly repetitive game state.
Yeah.
And then the other one that we haven't got to talk about yet is Shadow. So what's the deal with Shadow, TBS?
So Shadow is a creature ability. It's mostly on white, blue, and black creatures, and it basically it's kind of like flying. It's like creatures with Shadow can only be blocked by other creatures with Shadow, but they also cannot block creatures without Shadow. So it's basically mimicking this kind of, let's call it, parallel world where these creatures can interact, but no other creatures can interact with them. Now, nearly all of the shadow creatures were like on the smaller side. They were definitely low toughness, and they were definitely kind of like more aggressively slanted, like with their stats. A lot of like 3/1s, 2/1s, and things like that.
A lot of ships passing in the night. That's what Shadow was.
Yeah, and again, this is like one of those, like, they were looking for a new flying. I mean, that's honestly what they were trying to kind of like say. Is there any space in creating kind of other types of flying being kind of an evasive ability, but there is interactions. In the case of flying, you have reach creatures, you have other flying creatures, and spells that target flying. So it's like, okay, can we have another one? They tried Shadow. I think Shadow is a little bit too restrictive. The fact that it can't block or be blocked by things with Shadow means that a lot of combat, as Luis just said, is ships passing in the night. So if I have a deck that has no shadow creatures and I have a deck with shadow creatures, there is no combat. There's no like blocking at all. And so therefore it becomes very race oriented. Now, obviously it changes a little bit when you both have shadow creatures, but because they were restricted to 3 colors and there wasn't that many other breaks, you ended up just not interacting that well. And in Constructed, it was even worse, where most times your deck, was all shadow, and you weren't even trying to block, and all you're doing was attacking, and your opponent, unless they were kind of playing the mirror match, you basically had no interaction there. And so reducing the amount of interaction just wasn't actually that fun ultimately. Though, I think it was actually a good attempt at trying to kind of like change the battlefield when it comes to what's important.
So I have a question about Shadow for you, TBS. Well, first of all, do you think Shadow was overall good, bad, neutral? Like, where would you put it on terms of mechanics?
From a modern perspective or at the time?
I would say, like, I guess for the time, I think there's a lot more to go. Like, if you had to do Shadow again, like you would pull it back or not do it, right?
I don't think I'd do it.
Yeah. So I guess my question is more, do you think Shadow with a slightly different set of stats and less of an aggressive bent could be something, or is it just overall not a very good mechanic?
I think overall it's not a very good mechanic, though I do think the stats and just the costings made it even worse than it was. There was also a little bit of kind of there's another card that we'll talk about, Cursed Scroll, that kind of like played into Shadow a little bit poorly. Nearly every creature was killable by this card, Cursed Scroll, and so I think it also made that card even better than it needed to be. But that's this kind of set context. Overall, I think this is not a good mechanic. I think there are better ways to try and like make combat interesting, and I certainly don't think that making it like, I think Menace is actually overall a better kind of shadow-like ability that gets you some of the way there, where it kind of like forces you to kind of
Menace is great.
Yeah. I think Menace is a tremendous ability because it makes blocking relevant, which is good. Now, obviously, it advantages the attacker quite a lot, as also the person goes first, which is like not that great. Shadow does as well. But overall, you can just slow down. You can either play more blockers, you can play 2 blockers in one turn. There's a lot of ways that
there's a lot of interaction. Yeah, there's ways to play with it. Whereas Shadow, it's pretty binary. It's like, do you have a shadow creature? Well, no, then you can't block at all. Yeah. And then in the event that you do, yes, maybe some happens, but there's so many fewer decision points.
Yeah, and it's also the proof is in the pudding, right? You could tell that they were experimenting with, are there other dimensions beyond on the ground and in the air that we could introduce to the game? And they decided no, right? I mean, they haven't gone back. Like, there's not, the only other one I can think of is Horsemanship, which is just, adapted flying for one set.
Portal 3 Kingdoms flying, yeah.
Right. So there's not...
Shadow shows up every now and then. Dothy Voidwalker has Shadow from, MH2 or whatever. But, that's a one-off. That's just like...
I meant as a design space. They clearly decided after this, no, that's not the route that we want to go. And we haven't seen more attempts at, that. They've just modified what we have in much better ways, like you guys said, with Menace. Other thing is, I got to give a shout out to my best friend Jay, man, back in the day when we were playing, I was trying to stupid combos and, these, 80 card decks like Luis is describing, but he was playing freaking Soltari Monk, Soltari Priest, Soltari Trooper, and Armageddon, and just destroying everybody with that. So props to Jay for figuring that one out early. There were some cycles in this, in Tempest that were, some of them are kind of like the Circle of Protections are here, not that interesting. Lycids?
Yeah, Lycids are great.
Why do these exist? These have as much text on them as a modern Magic card.
Yeah, so what Lycids are is they are a creature type, and there's a cycle. Actually, let me see how many Lycids there are.
Like ever?
Looks like 12 total Lycids. Not all of them in Tempest, but a lot of them in Tempest, Stronghold and Exodus. And let me give you an example of a, quote, simple Lycid. It's Quickening Lycid. It's 1 and a white for a 1/1, right? Summon Lycid. It's a common, by the way. You can pay 1 and a white and tap it. Quickening Lycid loses this ability and becomes an aura enchantment with enchant creature. Attach it to target creature. You may pay a white to end this effect. Enchanted creature has first strike. So,
you cheated and you read the modern templating.
Yes, sorry. The
it's
old
even worse.
It loses this ability and becomes a creature enchantment that reads enchanted creature gains first strike instead of a creature. Move Quickening Lycid onto target creature, and you can pay a white to end it. So basically, it's a cycle of creatures that have different effects. They're all auras. So Gliding Lycid gives a creature flying, and Stronghold, Calming Lycid makes the creature unable to attack, and so on and so forth. But they were just a ridiculous cycles because it's rules wise, there's all this confusion. Even remember Bestow from the Born of the Gods or whatever that, Theros cycle, where it's you put the creature on. You put the enchantment on a creature, and then when the creature dies, the enchantment stays in play as a creature. Now it's a creature, all that. Lycids were like that, except there was no get out clause. If the creature died when a Lycid on it, the Lycid would die, except if you had enough mana to jump the Lycid back off. You could block with a Lycid and then jump it onto a creature. So it's they're all infinite blockers. It's just a huge mess. Lycids are horrible.
Yeah. So Bestow is obviously the modern Lycid, and I think they figured out most of the problems of Lycids. One thing that old Magic design does a lot that they've basically gotten rid of is activated abilities. There's not a lot of activated abilities in modern sets. I mean, there are a couple, but if you have a look in some of the older sets, there's just a lot more. There's a lot more
those move
pingers.
To enter the battlefield effects, I think.
Yeah, and I think Lycids also were one of the more egregious of those activated abilities, because to use it usefully, you'd have to have it untapped, then you tap block something, then have it jump onto something else, and then it actually has to remove it. It has to untap again. It's an aura that has to untap, and there was just so much weirdness with the timing of the ability to make it useful that it was just not worth the squeeze, basically.
Yeah, the juice was not worth the squeeze by any stretch.
Not at all. The two things that jump to mind when I see Lycids, especially if you ever look at the artwork, and it does go to your other point that you made earlier, Luis, which is one, these designers watched Alien. Because Lycids look like the things that jump on your face. In this case, they're kind of somewhere else on you, but they're giving you this supercharged ability. And the other thing that comes to mind is this is where, even though normally it actually works out pretty well, this is where top-down design flops a bit, where somebody goes, in the design space goes, well, what if we had a creature that could basically jump onto one of your other creatures and give them an extra ability, but then you could pay to have it jump off and then jump onto another creature. And you get this sort of cool visual of these little, aliens or whatever they are jumping onto creatures and augmenting them and all that kind of stuff. It's oh yeah, let's do that. But when you send it through the rules side of the design experience and it spits out that text that Luis read, you have to wonder, is this worth it? And as you guys both just said, it ended up not really being worth it. And Lycids did not stick around in the same way that things like Slivers did. That's for sure. Another one, there's a few mana fixing cycles in here. There's medallions, which there's one for each color. An example would be Emerald Medallion, which, as you might guess, is the green. It's 2 mana for an artifact. Your green spells cost 1 less to play. And there was one for each color.
This is very good with buyback. That's why they.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why they had this set. It's like because it would reduce your first time you did it in the turn and the second time you did it in the turn, and
right.
So
that's kind of cool.
It's good that way.
Yeah, there was an attempt at mana fixing lands in the set. I believe there's 2 cycles, right? There's the tap pain lands like Scab Land. ETB's tapped. It taps for colorless. Or you can add red or white, but it does 1 damage to you. But then there was the other ones that like stayed tapped, like Rootwater Depths. It taps for 1 colorless, or you could tap it to add blue or black, but it doesn't untap during your next untap phase.
Yeah. So this was still a time where the concept of like friendly colors and enemy colors was still very, very kind of present. And so enemy colors got the worst of it when you get abilities. So, in Ice Age you had these untapped pain lands, and so that they were only allied colors.
Sulfur Springs and stuff still get played in Pioneer.
Right. So when they decided to put enemy colored pain lands in, they said, well, they shouldn't be as good as allied ones because they are enemy ones. So they put another negative. Like Magic has moved away from the concept that like color combinations are better at doing better as combinations than other combinations. So now all combinations are equal. So now all combinations have access to untapped like pain lands, etc., etc. So most cycles go.
So that's why
the 10 combination.
So go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say
that's why you have a tapped pain land.
Yeah, that's like ridiculous.
Well, this is also back when mana fixing was just terrible. Like, they hadn't really gotten the memo yet. And like, you go back and look at some of the old Pro Tours, and it's like, well, everyone played monocolor this Pro Tour because the lands weren't good enough to play multicolor. Or you look at Ken Ho won the Odyssey Block Pro Tour with Tarnished Citadel in his 2-color deck. That's a land, taps for a colorless or taps for a mana of any color, does 3 damage to you.
Oh,
a triple pain land. And it's because his deck was a blue-green deck, and all the best cards. It was Blue-Green Madness. It was playing Islands, it was playing Forests, and it was playing a Tarnished Citadel. I think that was the only fixing.
That's brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and TBS, you were mentioning how they were much bigger on this enemy idea between colors, and oh my God, they printed color hosers back then.
The hosers.
What there's a card in this set called Choke, 2 and a green enchantments. Islands do not untap during their controller's untap phases. That's it. They never untap.
I mean, if you play Legacy or even sometimes Modern, you kind of you see these kinds of some of these cards like Boil and Choke are both legal in Modern. Boil's instant 3 and a red, destroy all islands. Chill is an enchantment for 1 and a blue. Red spells cost 2 more to play. Imagine you're playing mono red in a PTQ and your opponent just goes turn 2 Chill, and it's just like you have a double sphere of resistance on every single spell in your deck.
And there's warmth in this set. 1 and a white enchantment. Whenever target opponent successfully casts a red spell, gain 2 life.
Oh yeah.
Successfully cast. Note if you counter their red spell, you don't gain 2. Though I don't even think it works that way anymore. It's just now when they cast a red spell.
It is. You're right. Whenever an opponent casts a red spell, you gain 2 life. But I mean, these were like, oh my God, like they had no chill. Well, they had to literally chill, but my goodness, they were not gonna let you get away with it.
I mean, Light of Day is another one. Like white and 3, black creatures cannot attack or block. This is like wipes out all black creatures.
That's a real card in this set?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Light of Day.
Light of Day. Oh yeah, I remember that artwork.
It's incredible. And what they were trying to do, and this is I'm going to try and sit in the designer's shoes right now, is that they were actually trying to encourage people to play more than one color, so that like hoses weren't going to hit you. Like if you were playing mono red, well, you kind of deserved it because
No, you're right, TBS. It was a great design decision. Let's print these horrific color hosers. So if you're monocolor, you're just completely demolished, and also not print any good lands. So you have to play monocolor and put Wasteland in the set. So if you dared to play two colors, you would just get Wastelanded into oblivion. No, this is really good design. I'm with you.
Yeah, TBS is right.
I love playing these Magic back then, so I don't know what that says about me, but I mean,
part of what it says about you, no joke, by the way, is back then people like you who were in the know had a huge advantage over people who weren't. You would just show up at a PTQ and play against people who had decks that weren't capable of winning games in constructed. Like that's just not the case anymore. And I'm not saying that that's a bad quality. It is fun to play games when you know stuff other people don't. So like that's a perfectly understandable position. I mean, by the time I started playing, people had kind of wised up. But even then, you'd play against a lot of decks that couldn't win. And that, I don't know, winning is fun. I do enjoy winning.
TBS, you mentioned that Tempest had the first pre-release, like special pre-release card.
Yeah, so kind of when they started in pre-releases, they were just like normal tournaments, nothing special about them necessarily. And then they started like trying to actually have a like very structured pre-releases that were kind of global. So every region would have a pre-release that everyone would go to. It's not like the store pre-releases we have now. You would actually have one for like each big city or state, and you'd have the entire kind of region kind of like go towards that. And in those tournaments, they started trying to promote them by giving exclusive cards. And the first pre-release card was Dirt Cow Worm. It's not much of a card really now or ever, but at the time they thought it was actually going to be a good card because it was kind of trying to compare favorably to Urnam Gen. In essence, it wasn't very good at all. But it did look cool, and it had a gold stamped date of the pre-release on it. So they did this for quite a while.
TBS got so passionate about pre-release cards that he took off.
What do you think he was going to say, Luis?
Well, they did print.
He's back.
There you are. He's back. You got time warped
pick
for a
up
second.
TBS. You said that they did that actually for a while with those stamps.
Yeah, they did it a while, and then they eventually stopped, and now every card is a pre-release card. Every card potentially can be a pre-release card. So
That's
you can
true.
Get the pre-release version of that, which I'm more of. I don't like the fact that everybody gets a participation trophy. So they should just choose one.
Just, even if it's Dirt Cow Worm, sometimes you just got to choose. Let's go over some of the individual cards in the set that stood out to us for various reasons. The one that I wanted to start off with, because there's a number of notable cards in this set. Really, there's a lot. But the one that I remember the most from back then was Cursed Scroll, which has awesome artwork for starters, but also in its time, it was the chase card. Like, it was the card that people were trading old, expensive cards for. It was the card that you couldn't find at the local store. Nobody had them. It was the kind that the dealers were buying, and then the shady binder guy who wasn't really a dealer, but always hung around the store and would like see what everybody was opening up in their packs and then try to hit up the kids for whatever they could get, was always looking for Cursed Scroll. It was like I think at the time, $20 was kind of the high water mark for, a rare in a current set, and Cursed Scroll was it. I'll read it, by the way. It was 1 mana for an artifact, and you can pay 3 mana and tap it, and then name a card. And then it says, target opponent chooses a card at random from your hand. If he or she chooses the named card, Cursed Scroll does 2 damage to target creature or player.
So the reason why this card was awesome is basically it was at its best in aggressive decks where you dumped your hand pretty quickly, and you'd end up with just one card in your hand, and you could always be guaranteed and naming the correct card.
Did the upkeep exist at the time? Like, could you say like before my draw step?
Yeah, you can do that too. So there's a lot of flexibility there. Also, it was a time where like weenie decks or just small creature decks were very, very prevalent. And so it had this weird kind of position of being very good against like weenie decks and very good in weenie decks because it was a good finisher. So it became kind of like the trump card in those battles. Also, against control decks, it was a repeatable, very hard to kill source of damage against control decks. And so when you just put all that together, it was just like one of the best cards that you could have for the formats that it was in. So much so that it was actually banned in Block Constructed of that format. It was talked about to get banned in Standard or Type 2 at the time, but they didn't get to that point. That being said, it was so hard to get. It was as expensive as a Standard card could get, and it was ubiquitous. Every aggressive deck had them. So
it's still worth $15.
That surprises me a bit.
Yeah, well, who the heck is playing with Curse Scroll?
I mean, I just presume Commander players are playing.
Curse Scroll is so cool.
It must be that, honestly, Luis. It must be people like us who played it when we were younger, and it just, I mean, to me, it's a huge nostalgia hit just to see the card. Like, I'm tempted to buy one. I have absolutely no use for it. I just would like to look at it. Like, seriously, it was that big of a deal back in the day.
Is it in pre-modern? I'm not sure what the sets of pre-modern. Pre-modern is getting pretty big nowadays, so could be. It could be because of pre-modern. Like a lot of the pre-modern cards are getting a bit high.
Okay, so there you go. One of my favorite cards from back then, although maybe it wasn't even good. I guess you guys could tell me, was Reflecting Pool, which is a land that allows you to make mana of any type that any land you control could already produce.
So this is a card that was pretty good back then. It was much, much better when it was reprinted much later. I forgot exactly which set.
Shadowmoor?
I'm going to let Luis kind of explain why it was very good in kind of more modern times.
Well, they had Vivid Lands, which are the lands that come to play tapped with 2 counters on it. They tap for a color, or you could tap, remove a counter, and mana of any color. Reflecting Pool in a Vivid land, Reflecting Pool sees that the Vivid could produce any color, therefore it can produce any color. And this is how you had decks that just like strolled up playing all lands, no fixing, no no talismans, no chromatic stars, and we're just putting Cruel Ultimatum, Wrath of God, and Cloud Thresher on the same deck. And it's just anything goes.
Yeah, that was a great. So I love that card, but undoubtedly the most important land from Tempest is Wasteland.
Ancient Tomb is pretty close.
It's Wasteland. Yeah, undoubtedly it is Wasteland.
I mean, Wasteland is the most defining. I mean, it's obviously a powered down version of Strip Mine, but Strip Mine was egregious. So even a powered down version of Strip Mine is really good. Sorry, for those who don't know, who've lived under a rock for probably 26 years, Wasteland is a colorless land, so you tap for one colorless mana, but you also can tap and sacrifice it to destroy a non-basic land. So often what you do is you play a 1-drop and then you'd waste your opponent's next land, and then you'd waste the next land, and if you were lucky enough to draw 3, you'd waste the next land, and you just get ahead by hitting them for the creatures that you've already played.
Yeah, Wasteland's only $23.
No, there's a time when it was a lot more than that.
Yeah. I in fact, I don't know why, but I loved Wasteland way back then, even though I didn't play decks that ran it. My mana wasn't functional at all, let alone had enough slots for Wastelands back then. But I love the artwork. It's actually by one of my all-time favorite artists for Magic, Una Fricker. And she's also the one that did my favorite all-time artwork. So on YouTube, it's behind me there, which is the Manowar art from Portal, where the Manowar is like dragging off a shark. And I have that. What I have on my wall is the original. It's the one I actually bought it from her. And she did the artwork for Wasteland and a whole bunch of other stuff. But yeah, I mean, the card's an icon at this point. It's one of the GOATs. What are some of the other cards for you guys that stood out?
I certainly remember Troyden Rider being a really big one. This is a 3 blue for a 1/4 flyer. You can tap it and tap 2 other creatures, return target permanent to its owner's hand. And this card was super fun. Like, well,
Whoa,
maybe a little
whoa,
less fun than if you were on the other side of it, but it did some really good stuff. Like it was just like you could lock them out, just bounce their permanents a bunch of times. Like a really, really powerful, sweet card. And I remember playing with this card and being like, whoa, this card does some stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this card was like tournament viable for nearly all the time it was in. Plus, it was in extended and also really, really good. The kind of manager for organized play, Huey Jensen, actually won a Master Series with a Trade-Wind Rider deck. So he obviously it was just a fantastic card, and honestly fun to build around. I mean, again, not that fun to play against sometimes, but like definitely the decks that you make with it are actually really, really interesting to build. One of my favorites is Living Death. Was like Living Death is similar to a card that's out now called Living End, but Living Death is a sorcery. It's 2 black and 3. Set aside all creature cards from all graveyards, then put each creature that is into play into its owner's graveyard, then put all the creatures that you set aside into play. This was actually the backbone. A lot of like decks with sackable creatures, as well as like just ways to fill up your graveyard, and it acted as both a Wrath of God and a Reanimate at the same time. It was just a fun effect that was also interesting to build around because there were creatures that were particularly good in Living Death decks. As I said, there's creatures that kill themselves. There are creatures that like can like do little bits of recurring. Also, the card is good against aggro decks, which is also handy. So I thought this was always a really fun card and the first of its kind. Now there's a couple versions of it now. Obviously, Living End being kind of the most kind of obvious one because it's in Modern right now.
There was a bunch of firsts in the set and ones that...
A lot of them. Yeah,
that gained their nickname going forward after that. Some of them that jump out, one of them is Gravedigger. That's the 3 and a black 2/2, and when it ETBs, you get a creature from your graveyard back to your hand. And that's we still would use that term today if they came out with a card in the next set that had that effect. We would say, oh, it's a Gravedigger, but it flies, or it's a 3-mana Gravedigger, or whatever, that type of thing. Apparently, Windrake made its debut here, which is the 3-mana 2/2 flyer, and we call basically any 2-powered 3-mana creature a Windrake, for limited purposes. Jackal Pup. This is the red mana for a 2/1, and do we still use that? I still think we would, right? It also has the ability for each 1 damage dealt to Jackal Pup, it deals 1 damage to you. But I don't know. Red 2/1s are still called pups or Jackal Pups sometimes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then we also had Diabolic Edict's a big one. So this is the 1 and a black instant target player sacrifices a creature. This is the first removal of this kind. I remember this being like a big deal when this came out.
And we still call these edict effects.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because of this one. Another one, Overrun. The bane of many limited players' existence made its debut here, and we still use that term to describe this type of effect. And then probably the GOAT for this category, Reanimate, is in this set, which we call all spells that do this reanimation spells. We also call the deck Reanimator. It's all started with black sorcery, put target creature card from your graveyard into play under your control, lose life equal to that creature's total casting cost. It is funny how we speak differently now.
Actually, just kind of heading back to kind of like limited specifically, the bane and maybe boon of many limited players was Rolling Thunder. Rolling Thunder is a card that like...
How is this this is a common, right?
It's a common. Okay, so it's red, X. Sorcery, Rolling Thunder does X damage, divided any way you choose amongst any amount of targets. So either it's a one-sided Plague Wind, or it just kills you. Especially in a format where there's a lot of low toughness creatures because of Shadow, Rolling Thunder was just like so game breaking and back breaking that, it was basically you can't pass this card in draft. Now, I think in modern terms, it actually is a little bit obsoleted. I think some of the formats are now too fast for this card. That being said, it's still very good. And it will still get played in every deck that could cast it. It's just not as backbreaking as it was in this format. This format was defined, like the draft format, was defined by Rolling Thunder and your ability to kind of like duck and weave around it.
Kind of funny.
Rolling Thunder was just like the equivalent of like a mythic rare if it at common.
At common.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just crazy. One interesting thing that you see pop up a little bit at this stage, again, we're 12 sets in, but Magic, technically came out in 93, but, it was already halfway through, the year, and probably 94 is when you start to be able to actually get your hands on some cards, not just alpha and beta, of which there were very few floating around, not even enough to meet the demand of the day, not even close. So, we're only 3-ish years into the run here, but you start to see corrections pop up here and there. Cards like Time Warp is in the set, right? Where they're like, okay, maybe Time Walk was a little bit aggressive on the cost, so they bumped it up to 3 blue instead of 1 and a blue. And, we mentioned it with Lotus Petal as well, right? They're like, all right, 3 mana for free is just broken. That's too much. We can't do that. How about 1 mana, right? It's like, it turns out that's kind of broken too. And you can see them kind of playing around with it. Wasteland, right? All right, Strip Mine was too far. We get it, but how about if it only blows up these things, and you start to see them start to tweak around with stuff like that to try to kind of maybe correct past mistakes while still having these type of effects exist in the game.
Yeah, and I think they generally were pretty successful with those. I mean, I wouldn't say they were all amazing, but overall, the kind of, if you think of like the parallel of a set being a bell curve, historically it's actually been really wide bell curve, as in like there's the power levels all over the place. But actually most of the cards are like within what I consider like almost modern thresholds of like power between each other. And you'll see this kind of continue to happen all the way up to modern day, where cards are much closer in relative power level than what they were in earlier sets.
Right.
And what that generally means is that you get a good set because like the cards play off each other more interestingly. They generally have more chance of actually synergizing better. Just overall, you can see the what is the skeleton of modern Magic design really taking form in this set. And I think it's so great that many of the lessons they've learned, even in this set, are being applied to the modern sets that we are playing now.
One of the things that stood out to me as well, especially looking back today, was the abundance of build-around cards in the set. This might be a function of the fact that they did do 110 of each rarity, so there's more uncommons and more rares. Which means more design space and more weirdness that you can kind of fit in. But even just a few of the cards that stood out, even though there's a lot of them, cards like Altar of Dementia, right? Which is like what it lets you sack creatures to mill your opponent for their mana cost.
We played that at the Hogak Pro Tour.
Oh yeah, that's right. Let me read it just because I can't remember the exact seas. So 2 mana, sack a creature, target player mills equal to the number of that creature's power, right? Yep. So that makes you think, I wonder what I could do with that, that type of thing. Grindstone, speaking of milling, this is a card that became a combo piece down the line. It's 1 mana for an artifact, 3 mana, tap it, mill the top 2 cards of target player's library. If both cards share at least 1 color, then you get to repeat the process, right? So that, gets your brain going about, what can I do with that? Goblin Bombardment is in this set, which again, it's 1 and a red enchantment, sack a creature. This thing does 1 damage to anything. This makes you think, what could I do with it? Like, could I make a whole bunch of tokens and get my opponent in one big shot? And then, there's cards like Allurin in the set as well. I mean, this set is like packed with this type of stuff.
I mean, how many cards in this set either are the first version of something like Gravedigger or Diabolic Edict, or are cards that people are just legendarily historic, like Goblin Bombardment, Living Death. Like
right.
Tempest, the percentage of bangers in Tempest is unbelievable.
It's really high, especially looking back, right? Yeah. And to me, it had this real quality that, and this is what I loved about it back then, because I wasn't playing competitive, was it made my imagination go about different decks that I could build. There was just so many hooks in this set that said, maybe you could build around me, maybe you could build an Allurin deck, maybe you could figure out a way to make Grindstone good, that type of thing.
But even this is what I love about this set. Even the simple cards were really, really like interesting. Mog Fanatic. Mm-hmm. Now,
oh yeah,
this is a card that is much, much more complex than what it reads. So Mog Fanatic is a 1-red 1/1, and you can sacrifice itself to do 1 damage to target creature or player. Like, it obviously does something very simple, but the way it changes kind of the battlefield and combat, and especially when those damages are stack, it obviously changed some dynamics there.
That was huge.
But it overall, I think Mog Fanatic is one of the most interesting aggressive cards because it allows you to. It's not like super powerful. If you play in turn 1, you're just doing 1 a turn, but it really made your opponent play very different. It made the value of 1 toughness creatures very different. I think this card is actually, quietly one of the most interesting aggressive cards that has ever been printed. Not because it's the most powerful, just because of the interesting things it does to kind of like to games.
Any other cards that caught your eye, Luis?
Looking at Verdant Force was a classic. Yeah, that one was funny.
Yeah.
Scraggy.
Scragnoff. So Verdant Force was a 5 green, 8 mana 7/7. At the beginning of each upkeep, you put a 1/1 into play.
No, it was during each player's upkeep.
Oh, sorry, during, yes. I forgot.
It could be at the beginning, the middle, the end. Like it's somewhere in the upkeep. You choose. That's really funny.
It was one of the original big creatures to like natural order for or do something with,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that looking at the list of Tempest cards, a lot of them, I mean, something like Grindstone is a great example of a card that was kind of languished in obscurity for a long time. And then Painter Servant came out in Shadowmoor, I think it was. And all of a sudden now it's like, oh, Grindstone's part of a infinite combo.
Right. Yep. And it became an important piece of that. We should mention that they did have a section of gold cards here as well, but this was still early days for gold cards. So you got some cards that were really interesting and then some that were, hey, look, you get this and this, right? Like Sky Spirit's a perfect example. It's 1 blue-white for a 2/2 with flying and first strike because the blue brought the flying and the white brought, and that was the cleverness that they were at with that, where it was like, oh, you're not supposed to get these together, but if you pay gold, you do. That being said, there's cards like Lobotomy, which is 2 blue-black for a sorcery. Look at target player's hand and choose any of those cards other than a basic land. Search that player's graveyard, hand, and library for all copies of the chosen card and remove them from the game. That player shuffles his or her library afterwards.
I mean, this was a time when Frostbloom, there's a combo deck that was still around. So a card like this was actually quite exciting because it was able to break up some of those combos. I mean, there were a couple cards that did something like this, like Justice Cap did something similar, but this was the one that was like the most proactive and the most aggressive of those cards. And honestly, is a template of a lot of modern kind of combo breaking cards like Slaughter Games, etc., etc. So it's actually
they have figured out that if you take a card out of someone's hand, they generally either replace it with another card or a zombie or something like that.
Yeah. Ancient Tomb's in this set, by the way. We got to give Ancient Tomb a shout out. Just they don't make lands that tap for 2 mana anymore, regardless of the cost, just because they kind of break a core tenet of the game. Okay, well, let's zoom out before we take off here and talk big picture. TBS, what's the lasting legacy of Tempest, what stands out to you the most after having kind of walked through it here?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the individual cards, but like I think the parallel of the best cards in the set, and honestly, maybe not even just the power level, just kind of the impact from a design perspective. As you said, there's a lot of firsts in Tempest. I think that's the lasting legacy. Like, you see a lot of things happen first in Legacy, in Tempest, and also I think Slivers. I think Slivers is probably the impact that you'll see kind of on a casual basis.
Mm-hmm.
The Slivers are definitely going to come back at some point. I'm almost certain there'll be a set that focuses around Slivers because it's such a cool mechanic.
It's too cool not to, yeah.
Yes.
And too popular.
I think those two. I don't think the two keywords, shadow and buyback, will ever really kind of see, like, let's say a full release again. But they were actually interesting, like, steps in trying to develop new. They certainly were kind of like reasonable shots. Now they both happen to be, I think, pretty negative overall, but I don't think they're kind of as terrible as like bands with other legends or anything like that. They're actually pretty powerful. They're just not very fun. And I think that's something they actually didn't get until much later, actually. I think there was a lot of not fun mechanics in early Magic, and we all just learned to kind of deal with them in early Magic. And then later on, they're going to say, hold on, we actually need to make the mechanics themselves fun.
Luis, what about you? What's going to stand out to you? What stood out to you as we went through the set and the cards?
I mean, honestly, for Tempest, it's like it set the groundwork for a lot of really iconic cards and themes. And I think that's more than any one thing it did. It's just that we have this legacy of, Diabolic Edict and all, its whole lineage, right? And other examples like that. And Tempest was just like a pretty well constructed, well organized set. This one feels like, with all the cycles and all the themes, this was one, and the fact that it was planned out for a 3-set block and there was a story. This felt like one of the most organized Magic sets that you might take for granted now because all Magic sets are pretty much like that. Mm-hmm. But Tempest was them really nailing down that process.
Yeah, that's what stands out to me as well. I mean, I think all three of us agree that Alpha is the best Magic set ever. And, there was a world like where Magic took baby steps into what it would end up becoming. Instead, it took a huge leap with Alpha that set the stage for so many of the things that are still in the game today. The team and the people behind that were just geniuses somehow, just stuck the landing on so many things, found so many things. It was what started the series for us, was you guys wanted to talk about Alpha. I mean, and that was a big part of the reason why. But, from my perspective, when I look back, Tempest was the next step. It was the next, okay, we're going to take a full step forward with this whole thing. They laid a bunch of new groundwork that wasn't in Alpha. A lot of the cards that we talked about here today, things like Reanimate, Overrun, Gravedigger, those type of cards that were like, we still see tropes on those today that there weren't those type of cards in Alpha. And then the structural element of it, the fact that they knew where they were going to go with it when they started it. They stuck the landing on the set itself, but also put it into context for the block, which we'll be talking about, on the next one of these. But to me, the combination of them having really discovered a whole bunch of new steps to take forward, and also having put it into a structure that would become the structure of Magic for years and years after this, only up until a few years ago did that structure get broken, and really carried Magic, to its heights. To me, this is a very clear marker for step number 2 in the right direction for Magic. And this is one of the best sets, I think. Looking back at this, this is just awesome. I mean, this is a set that gave us pants. How can we not like that?
I
think if you're scoring grading on a curve, this is very, very high on the list.
Yeah,
sure. You probably easy A, and I think A+ is maybe a little bit much, but A seems very reasonable.
There you go. All right, well, let's call it there. TBS, first, thanks so much for coming on and walking us through not only the first segment we did in the show about the new boosters, but also looking back at Tempest. It's always great to chat with you. Where can people find you? What have you been up to, etc.?
So still, you see my podcasting situation is improved.
It looks good.
Yes, so we're still in the kind of concept design phase of a new piece of content that I'm looking at. But you can always find me on X or Twitter, depending on how you and I'm at TBS- there.
Okay, I'll put a link in the show notes to your Twitter
X.
as well. Your X. Yeah.
X.
Everywhere writes it X, formerly known as Twitter now, so it's just longer.
Sign up a good rebrand when everyone still uses the old name. No.
Yeah. It's really stuck. But again, thanks TBS for coming on. We know you're over in Europe now, and the time zones and stuff can get tricky, but we appreciate you coming on as always, and look forward to having you back on again soon. That is going to do it for this episode of the show. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. TBS's Twitter, again, will be in the show notes if you'd like to give him a follow and keep up with him on his new content venture. Maybe some updates on Twitter as you work your way through. We'll see. You can find everything related to the podcast over at lrcast.com, including all previous episodes of the show, including all the ones with TBS. Just search for TBS because I always put that in the title so that you can find all of the episodes that he's done with us over the years. And you can go back in time. You can listen to that one about Alpha if you want. It was a banger, and every other show that we've done. It also has links to all of our stuff on the front page. I mentioned Luis's YouTube channel early on in the show. You can find a link to that as well as his Twitch and everything else on the front page of lrcast.com. I want to say thank you once again to our supporters on Patreon. And with that, we'll see you next week.
All right. TBS, since we're delving into, when you became a pro, when you all that, I kind of made some mentions. I actually was curious. At what point do you feel like you were like a Magic pro?
Pro? I never thought it. I mean, honestly, because I was always what I consider a second tier player. And I don't think it's tried to be false modesty. I just never really hit it. But I did have a very, very successful 14, 15 months where I won 2 Grand Prix and top 8 at a Pro Tour. I think that year I was like on the cusp of like being able to, say, okay, this is going to happen. And then
that's all Luis did, and he's been writing it ever since. That was in 2008. I mean, come on.
I think there's been a few other results since then.
I mean, there's a few blips on the radar, but like.
So look, I'm not saying when did you identify yourself as a full-time Magic pro, because I know you're not. That never really was, your gig or whatever. But like you were friends with all the guys who were playing on all the PTs. You played a bunch of PTs yourself. Walking into a PTQ, people would be scared to play against you.
Weren't you rooming sort of with Kai and stuff?
No. So absolutely. So my first Pro Tour was in '96. The first time I felt like I was let's call it a PTQ boss was probably in about 98 or so. I had a run from 98 through to 2001 where I made top 8 of Australian nationals every year, though it was just like almost clockwork. And then it folded into breaking into the international scene with the Grand Prix wins and the Proto top 8. So it's hard to kind of pin it down, but I think I felt very comfortable in my play skill in about 98 or so. And then I think my peak of my play skill was probably 2004. And then I actually started becoming a professional game designer at that point. And I actually definitely took a step back from making the effort to become to keep up as a Pro Tour player. But as I've always tried to get to the Pro Tour, I still do. For a while, I had the streak of long. I can't remember what the streak was, but I played a Pro Tour in every season for the longest time.
Yeah.
But that got broken a while back as well. But I'm more of a journeyman than I ever was a pro, and I'm happy for that. Like Magic's been such a big part of my life, but it also is just been kind of sidelined a little bit by career in the last probably couple decades.
Yeah, which I think is very reasonable and not an issue, like not a bad decision.
No.
I think for me the first time I felt I was like a pro, like that was my profession, was 2007 was the year I played all 4 of the Pro Tours and Worlds. Like that was to me a pretty clear dividing line of like, I'm now doing this. I graduated college and this is what I'm doing. I played all of them, when I guess the transition moment that I was kind of alluding to for you and for me was like, at what point do I feel like at a PTQ, I'm one of the people expect to win. I played a couple pro tours, because I would say like about a year earlier, like culminating in I guess my first breakout finish at nationals where I lost to Paul Cheon in the top 8. That was the first time when I started thinking, oh, I'm actually like I could be good at this, and I think that goes a pretty interesting shift because I mean I remember being the guy at a PTQ who people had no idea who I was. I was coming with my roommates to play. We knew who the PTQ end bosses were, and it wasn't us, And then eventually it became us.
Yeah. No, I think that I had that pretty early in my career because the Sydney scene, which I grew up with, was actually relatively small, and I was part of the best team in the local area, and one of us would invariably win every PTQ all the time. So, but I was the worst of those players, and so in some ways I was feared, but only by association. And I think that's still kind of true now. Nearly every one of my friends is like a better Magic player than me, is either a Hall of Famer or just famous content creator or something else like that. And to me, that's fine. It's just fun to be part of the community still. It's fun to be recognized. I still can sling spells. I can still mix it, but it's really, really hard to keep up with Magic. When you've got work, you've got kids. I mean, I'm sure your ability to keep up with Magic is much harder with your with your kids and making sure that you're giving them enough time as well.
Yeah, and I've got not a kid exactly, but Marshall, asking me about the podcast every week, and it's like.
I mean, we were talking about like playing the arena opens on play dates while the kids are at parks. That's definitely happened a few times for me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of part of the deal. Like that is what you have signed up for. And, we can only thank our lucky stars that you can play a competitive tournament from your phone. I could never have dreamed that was the case, but I don't know. I personally did enjoy the transition from being kind of anonymous to being like one of the PTQ grinders to eventually being like a Pro Tour regular to eventually being one of the people thought was pretty good. So it's been a fun journey. And I was curious about like kind of how yours went as well.
I'll have a more specific story next time because I have something in mind, but it's a bit of a long story, so we'll keep it for another time.